He's known as a community leader. He's known as an educator. He's known as a diplomat, a political advisor, and to Time magazine, he's known as one of the top preachers in the country. But to most, he's known as Pastor Hill. TBN presents the great messages of Dr. E.V. Hill, pastor of Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church of Los Angeles. And now, Pastor Hill.
I want to call your attention, and I want you to write it down and study it much later, to both that 7th and 8th chapter of the book of Judges. Judges, the 7th and 8th chapter. I shall not read a specific text at this moment. You will recall, of course, that Gideon has been selected to launch this assault against the Midianites, who were the enemies of Israel. You'll recall, of course, how Gideon said, was called a mighty man of valor, and how he asked the Lord for signs and what have you to confirm that God was with him. Then you will recall that he called out a large group, a large number, some 32,000 responded in gathering up this army to go against the combined forces of the Midianites, Amalekites, and others who had joined them, of 135,000. So they are outnumbered to begin with, about 32 against 135,000. Not only were they outnumbered, but they were out-equipped, and they didn't have the experience, because these 135,000 soldiers who were about to attack Israel were trained mercenary murderers. They were people who had been trained and skilled in fighting. Then you will recall how God said to Gideon, in spite of the fact that they were outnumbered 135,000 to 32,000, God said, you got too many. You have too many. This is quite different from what we're doing in Saudi Arabia overseas right now. He said, you have too many. And he cut them down. He had Gideon to tell everybody who was scared, go home. And that will always cut the crowd down when the crowd is overwhelmingly against you. And then even when he got down to these, he said, you still have too many. And to make the story short, he finally got down to where there were only 300 against 135,000. And Gideon raised his sword and said, let's get him. Imagine, let's see if I can draw a picture. Well, imagine the Coliseum, downtown L.A., completely packed, including the turf. It would be about 130,000. I think when Billy Graham was there, about 125,000. And then imagine 300 folk outside with swords and with lamps saying, let's get them. Well, I'm encouraged every time I hear that. Let's get them. Let's run them to death. And you will recall, by a miracle of God, that 120,000 of these nomad murderers were slain that night. And all Gideon and his men did was stood on the mountain and held their torches and cried out, behold the Lord, and the sword of the Lord and Gideon. The sword of the Lord and Gideon. Now note, if you please, they cried, the sword of the Lord and Gideon. Now there's some of you out there who every now and then, when we talk about great personalities like Billy Graham, like Paul, like Jan, you get this kind of feeling that we're taking something away from Jesus. There's no such thing. Honor to whom honor is due, and God has so much glory and power until you don't have to worry about when you honor another person who loves God and who's in the leadership. He says here, the sword of the Lord and Gideon, the sword of the Lord and Gideon. And that's all they did, 300 of them, with their torches and breaking their pitchers, just the sword of the Lord and Gideon, the sword of the Lord and Gideon. And God caused them to wake up confused. And God caused them to turn on one another. And they slayed 120,000. And not a one of Gideon's men were lost. They just got completely worn out by just standing there waving the torches. The sword of the Lord and Gideon, the sword of the Lord and Gideon. I pray, God, that such would happen if we have to go to fight across the seas. Now, but that left 15,000. This is still an unbelievable odds. I mean, the 135,000 to 300, you'd have to believe in God to even conceive of that. And I do believe this to be a true account. But then that still leaves 15,000 that Gideon said to his tired men, let's get them. And so now here are 15,000 folk running from their lives with only 300 folk chasing them. With only 300 folk chasing them. It's kind of like my little dog. My little dog used to come to the door, and when a great big dog would come by, because I'm standing there and the screen is pulled, oh boy, he'd run. And one day the screen flew open. And that dog came back in that house so fast, and he looked at who opened the door, stupid. But here, 15,000 soldiers running, not knowing who was behind them. And here, only 300 people and Gideon running and saying, let's get them. That's the spirit that the Christian church ought to have. I don't care how many sinners out there, 3 of us can chase the whole town. We can chase the whole town. We've got to regain that confidence, that spizzoranctum that we used to have. That's a good old Arkansas word, spizzoranctum. Get up and go. To believe that God and one of us can chase a whole town. Because God can do so much. He doesn't have to call on your strength. Never make plans according to your resources. If it's of God, make plans according to the resources of God and stand back and watch him fill it. But anyway, here they go, crossing Jordan, and they are behind them, just 300 of them, and they have their swords drawn, and 15,000 are running. But as they go, Gideon recognized that his men were exhausted. He recognized that they were tired, and they were hungry, and they were thirsty. Now, there was a group of people in a little town called Succoth, and they were also Israelites, so they're brothers. So what Gideon was doing on his behalf included them, but they had not participated in the warfare. So Gideon just said, as he went through the little town, we're chasing the Midianites, our common enemy, and would you give us some bread and some water? That's what they cried. You can find that in the 8th chapter, along about the 5th verse.